To our October colloquium at the College of Communication. My name is Michelle Amazine. I'm the director of the Communication Research Center, and I'm the Associate Dean for Research at the College of Communication. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. We are recording this session, so I kindly ask you to please silence your phones, your laptops, anything that beeps, so it doesn't interfere with our recording today. Secondly, if you are a student who is hoping to earn research participation credits through SONA, please be sure that you have checked in with our staff in back. And speaking of our staff, I see Amanda King, our Lab and Research Manager, and I see Yoonhee Choi, and Mingyu Palmer, our assistants this semester with the CRC. Thanks to all of you. This event would not be possible without you. So our colloquium speakers today are Dr. Katy Coduto and Professor Margaret Wallace. Dr. Coduto is an assistant professor of media science in the Department of Mass Communication, Advertising, and Public Relations. She holds a Ph.D. in communication from Ohio State University. Her research involves the intersections of mass media and interpersonal communication, focusing on how individuals use media to connect with each other and make sense of the world around them. Professor Wallace is an associate professor of the practice of media innovation in the Department of Film and Television. She holds a master's degree in communication from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She has spearheaded innovative games, digital media, and interactive entertainment ventures through leadership roles in both startups and established organizations. Her background includes designing and producing games and interactive entertainment products, developing collaborations with leading brands, and securing diverse forms of funding, including venture capital, angel investment, and strategic partnerships. Today, they are sharing some of the findings from their Faculty Research Seed Grant, a competitive research grant that was initiated by the College of Communication in the spring of 2024. By awarding research grants to faculty within COM, the CRC seeks to promote interdepartmental, cross-disciplinary collaborations on communication-related issues that will help society engage with modern challenges. Professors Coduto and Wallace proposed a study aiming to understand the potential positive and negative consequences of developing a relationship with artificial intelligence, which will help in creating interventions for the improvement of digital and technological literacy. The presentation is titled, Befriending Artificial Intelligence, How People Bond with ChatGPT Over Time. Please join me in welcoming Professors Coduto and Wallace.
Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Like Dr. Amazine says, we are going to present our work on how and whether people get to know artificial intelligence, specifically with a focus on ChatGPT. We won't go back over extensively who we are, but for clarity, I'm Katy Coduto in the Department of Mass Comm, Advertising, and PR.
Hi everyone, I'm Margaret Wallace from the Department of Film and Television. Oh, okay, so I'm up. So the official title of our research together was called Mapping Relational Trajectories with Generative Artificial Intelligence, Insights for Theory and Practice, and I was so excited to have this opportunity, and I really want to express our heartfelt thanks and appreciation to the Communication Research Center for making this funding available for us to conduct this research. So given my background in video games, I've been working with artificial intelligence since the beginning of my career. However, these days, with the advent of generative AI, you don't even have to purposefully log into Midjourney or ChatGPT these days to encounter generative AI. Whether you're using a Google search and you're encountering AI-generated answers, or you're using platforms like LinkedIn or Canva, we're encountering generative AI multiple times throughout our day, whether we want to or not, in many cases. What's more, with the release of powerful video and audio creation software and the rise of character-based chatbots, I was really grateful to have the opportunity to embark on this research that Professor Coduto is leading for this purpose. So the research goals are building on top of the work that Professor Coduto has done on relationship development and how people form bonds with each other. We're taking a look at how these considerations might be applied to ways in which people relate to generative AI, and we specifically focused on ChatGPT. So with that in mind, just to give you a sense of the general research goals, we were looking at various relational trajectory models to really establish, is there any carryover in terms of how people relate to interact with these generative AI platforms, specifically ChatGPT, and how might that evolve over time, and how might that impact our relationship with each other as well. We took a look at how humans form, develop, and sustain relationships with these systems. And again, mentioning that we focused on ChatGPT just because of its extensibility. We looked at whether generative AI influences trust in human relationships. And then finally, we're interested in providing actionable insights for scholars, practitioners, and potentially, hopefully, for the public and community at large. So the research was broken down into two components. The first is a quantitative component, which involved a 6-month longitudinal study. We conducted a quantitative wave study, 4 survey waves over a 6-month period. And we looked at how these relationships, quote unquote, with generative AI evolved over time. And then the second part of the study involved a qualitative component where we interacted and observed 50 individuals using ChatGPT. And there we were looking at early stage relational processes and firsthand the emotional behavioral responses to ChatGPT as they're using it in real time. Okay. Today, we're going to focus specifically on some of our initial findings with the quantitative portion of the study. And with that in mind, it's my pleasure to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Dr. Coduto.
So, like Professor Wallace said, we're focusing on the quantitative aspect today, in part because we have so much data. We were trying to think, what would be really compelling? What are some of the key takeaways? And for those of you who are on this train with us, we're hoping to submit this to ICA at the beginning of November, so that's also why it's very top of mind. And then once that's done, we will talk a little bit later about some of our initial qualitative findings and the giant task we'll be undertaking for that analysis. But so, like we said, we are interested in the quantitative perspective, and throughout both quantitative and qualitative, we had a couple different theoretical perspectives that we were interested in exploring and perhaps refining through our work. And so, as you can see here, I have the 3 kind of key areas laid out. And so first we're going to talk about, perhaps not surprisingly, computers are social actors. So this is a classic human-machine interaction theory, which basically says that people apply social scripts to their interactions with computers. This was proposed in the early 90s, so think back, if you were born, to what those computers were like, right? So this is pre-AI. This is literally like, how are you interacting with the machine itself as a conduit of information, as something that might be able to help you, but is not ultimately thinking for itself. And so the early research said that we apply social scripts to machines, sometimes mindlessly, often mindlessly, because we don't have another way to interact with them. Now, we might be a little more mindful, but for the most part, early theorizing said it's a machine, we don't have any other schema for how to interact with it, so we're going to apply our human rules, our typical social interaction rules to those. Now, like I said, this is human-machine interaction, and what has been really interesting over the last 5 or so years is the change from human-machine interaction to human-artificial intelligence interaction. Because unlike your MacBook, your Dell, even your old cell phone, AI has the ability to respond to us. And in fact, not just the ability, but anymore, we're increasingly expecting that. And so with this, the interaction between humans and artificial intelligence pushes against that classic reasoning of, okay, we're just going to apply that mindless social script. Now we're adapting. And so what is interesting is previous and recent research says that actually we might be able to befriend AI. We might get to know it. What's also interesting, though, is that early research in the 90s said that as you continue to interact with a computer, as you continue to interact with a machine, you did still become more and more polite to it. So in some ways, you still kind of got to know it. As you used it, as you became familiar with it, you're like, I can't be mean to it. And so there's some evidence now that we're going to do similar things with AI. We're getting to know it. And in this study at the bottom that I have here, users of Replica, so an AI that is designed to be friendly, designed to be social, people really felt like they got to know it. They started to develop a social connection to it. ChatGPT offers an interesting area to expand on that because ChatGPT is not an inherently social artificial intelligence. It certainly acts that way, but a lot of people have used it for tasks, right? Not that anyone in this room has ever used it to help with homework. Yeah, it's strong handshakes. But that's one of the things that's so interesting is so much of the research to this point, when we look at artificial intelligence, focuses on the social AI, so inherently social. ChatGPT offers us the chance to dig in a couple different directions and say, maybe you're getting to know it not just as a friend, but as a helper or as an assistant, and those are very different kinds of relationships. And so one of our key questions throughout this journey that we've been on is, well, how do people develop a sense of attraction to this artificial intelligence? And specifically, are there differences in things like task attraction versus actual social interpersonal attraction? And so, like we said, we looked a little bit at stage models of relationships, very interpersonal. We won't talk too much about those today, so you'll have to come to the next talk on the qualitative piece. But we are really focused on this question of different types of attraction to a machine. Now, another really interesting element of this are the potential affordances of ChatGPT. And so perceived social affordances of a technology are those elements or features of a technology that users decide that they can take advantage of. So if you have your text messages and you have your read receipts on, you are taking advantage of that affordance to let someone know that their message has been read. And if you turn it off, you're using that affordance in a very different way, right? You're still communicating something with it. You're still taking advantage of the features of the technology. And I think that affordances are a really interesting perspective across all communication technology for understanding how people utilize that technology, how they take advantage of it. But it's particularly interesting when we think about how this might help people as they are using something like ChatGPT, if it's helping them to feel more connected to it, if it's making it so that it's easier to use. And so research to this point has proposed numerous affordances, numerous ways that we might take advantage of a channel. And I listed the key ones that we're interested in here. So accessibility refers to just how easy is a channel to use. Bandwidth and social presence both relate to, well, how present does someone feel? Do you feel like you're having approximately an in-person interaction, or are you aware that there's a distance between you and the other interactant? Editability refers to how much you can edit or change a message that you're sending. And synchrony is, how real time are your interactions? And when we think about affordances of ChatGPT, all of these are elements that could help someone feel closer to, or at least better able to interact with technology. And so, like I said, I think this is really interesting for this area. It's something we talked a lot about in the development of our survey. I think this was one of the first ideas I had. But there are still questions about how this manifests in the AI space compared to between two people interacting with a phone or through the computer. And really importantly, we still have a lot of questions about how affordances may change over time. Because for a lot of us, right, if you think back, we said, maybe you get more polite to your computer. That could be in part because of the affordances. You start to learn how to use it better. You maybe feel better about your ability to edit those messages. You know how to use it. And so, from Fox and Gambino, and Fox was my advisor, so maybe I'm biased. But I thought this was a great quote to kind of highlight what we're trying to do. So perceptions of affordances are proposed to change over time, and yet very little research in the AI space has tried to tackle this. There is some evidence that this happens with social robots, so when you interact with something that has a physical presence, maybe it looks human, maybe it doesn't, but when something has a physical presence and you get to know it, you perceive it differently. And so we thought, well, maybe this is also happening when you are sitting on your computer talking to ChatGPT. And so we have a couple key research questions. If you want to know more, I can tell you a lot of these are actually more structured hypotheses, but for our purposes, I thought this would be a nice way to walk through our key goals. But so, first and foremost, we wondered how the different affordances that I just laid out for you might relate to social and task attraction. We also wanted to see if social and task attraction might change over time. So if you are initially attracted to ChatGPT, do you stay attracted? Or maybe do you start to break up with it? We also assessed perceived humanness, and that's something that, again, hasn't really been covered yet. There's some hints of this in the computers are social actors literature, and maybe a lot of you have heard Uncanny Valley, but we wanted to see if, as you get to know the technology, well, are you then perceiving it as more human, or are you getting to know something that you still know as a technology? And then finally, we wanted to know if the perceived affordances would change over time. So, like we said, this was a longitudinal study, and we launched everything back in January. December, January. And so what we did was we ran 4 surveys over 6 months. While these were happening, we were also doing those 50 qualitative interviews, so we had these running concurrently. And so for this, like I said, we did 4 studies. And at time 1, we assessed how much experience people had with ChatGPT. So one kind of key thing in our study also is that we did not require people to be users of ChatGPT at time 1. They could be total novices, they could be unfamiliar with it, and that was true for both the quantitative and qualitative parts. So we asked how much experience they have with ChatGPT, and then we also assessed, based on their experience, if they had any, what they perceived about it, what the perceived affordances were, and then we measured their initial attraction. And then we measured that attraction at the rest of the time points. We also then measured the perceived humanness. We also measured, like I said, not going to get into it too much today, but where they perceived themselves to be in their relationship with ChatGPT. So did they think of it as a new relationship? Did they feel like they had bonded at all? And so we did the same thing at time 3, and then at time 4, also the same thing, but then we added that perceived affordances back. Happy to talk at any point in the Q&A about why we measured what we did at certain times, and a lot of it has to do with managing our participant fatigue. And so just to give you an idea of what the survey looked like, so this is from time 1. We used the Fox and McEwen 2017 measure of perceived social affordances, and you can see here that we did adapt them to the ChatGPT context. So the original measure was focused on just this communication channel or this type of channel. We adapted it so that people could really be focused on the ChatGPT context. And now, let me tell you about our participants and trying to get them to participate in 4 time points. So we were very strategic in our both grant writing and then in our recruitment. We asked for many more people than we needed, knowing that we would likely have drop-off. So we started with 400 participants at time 1, and as you can see in our table, they slowly dropped off. But again, we planned for that, and so our final N was 196, so we ended up with about half, which we were very happy with. And only a few of those were people that we lost because of things like failed attention checks. Most were just people who didn't come back after a given time point. Really interesting that our average age for our sample was about 50 years old. So we have a really nice age range represented in this data. So the range is from 21 to 82. So that also really shows you just how many people are using this, are getting to know it, or are willing to get to know it. And we also had a really nice gender identity split, so just over half identified as female. We did have other gender identity options, and there were only, there's a very, very small portion of individuals who did not identify as male or female. So we ended up with a really nice, well-rounded sample, even with all of the flip-flops. And now, this is what everyone is absolutely most excited for. So what did we find as we took this journey with what people were doing with ChatGPT? First of all, certain affordances related to certain types of attraction. So, if you perceived ChatGPT as accessible, if this was something that you felt was easy to use, and you felt that it was socially present, so it mimicked interaction with a human, then you felt greater task attraction at time 1. And so what that tells us is that the easier the channel is to use, the more likely you feel it is a helper. So if you are using it to help at work, to help at school, your task attraction increased with every increase in accessibility, but also social presence. So it was a helper that it wasn't just easy to use, but it was also very much there with you. Now, then, on the other hand, perhaps not too surprising, bandwidth and social presence led to greater social attraction at time 1. This also makes a lot of sense because with task attraction, you're just trying to get something done, right? You have something you want to do, something very practical maybe. Whereas social attraction is much more about, is this someone I am friends with or could be friends with? Is this someone I feel an emotional connection to? And so if you're going to feel that kind of social attraction, with that potential emotional involvement, the two affordances focused on that idea of physical presence, of mimicking physical presence, is not too surprising. Also interesting, though, is that editability and synchrony did not relate to either form of attraction. So being able to edit your messages, adjust what you're saying, and that real-time interaction didn't matter. They were not significantly related to either one at time 1. Also important to remember that these are just their initial experiences. So this is what we asked people at the very first time point. We said, based on your initial affordance experience, how attracted are you? And I know this is what we really all want to know. So what we found is that there were indeed changes in task and social attraction over time. What's important here is that time in our analyses is the variable. So we didn't look to see if your social attraction was changing based on whether you were using certain affordances or certain use cases. We literally just wanted to see, for the sample as a whole, were there changes over time? And there were, but in very different directions. And so what you can see here is a very steady increase in task attraction over all 4 time points, with the greatest jump being between times 2 and 3, so right in that middle of the survey. What you'll also notice as you look at this table is that these means for these stayed high across all the time points. So even though we're lower at time 1, participants were still saying, I'm pretty attracted based on the tasks I have, at about a 3.7 out of 5. And so that only goes up over time. The most significant, like I said, is between times 2 and 3. On the other hand, there's also a steady drop in social attraction, which it is, and I'm happy to talk more about. What you'll notice is that at times 1 and 2, the means are almost exactly the same. So there's this steady initial feeling of, okay, I'll get to know this thing, and then it drops off at the same time that task attraction is really increasing. And just like with the task attraction being relatively high, social attraction is relatively low for the sample overall. So whereas task attraction, the lowest score was a 3.7 average, here the highest score is about a 2.7 average. So really interesting to see how these kind of split over time. Now, what's also interesting is that there was no change in perceptions of humanness at all. So once you had interacted with it, there wasn't a great change from time 1 to 2 to 3. One thing I will point out though is that these variables did relate to each other. So those who experienced social attraction did tend to experience it more and more over time. Those who experienced task attraction tended to experience it more. And this was true with humanness as well. So once you did perceive it as a human, once you said, yes, this is very similar, then you did continue to have that experience. So I think that's also interesting that for a lot of people, once they had kind of gotten to that point, they didn't necessarily lose it. But with the different types of attraction, it was only task attraction that grew to the entire sample. Now, what's also then interesting is that it was your perceptions of humanness at all time points that related to increases in perceived affordances, which is really awesome for talking about implications for computers are social actors and the perceived affordances framework that's honestly still in development. So as humanness increased, so did perceived affordances. And so what we can take away from this is that there's some really interesting learnings where people are learning about technology from their interactions with ChatGPT, but they're not necessarily just learning about ChatGPT. They're coming to a better understanding of how to achieve their goals. And I think one of the next steps will for sure be looking at how affordances and task attraction certainly relate, because for the perceived affordances at time 4, all 5 that we measured increased with humanness. And again, if you have specific stats questions, this is actually an SEM model that is chock clean. So happy to talk more about that.
Oh, okay, all right. It's really interesting also, once we have the opportunity to share with you the qualitative results and outcomes that we've discovered, it'll be interesting, I think, for you to hear how it largely syncs with a lot of the discoveries made in the quantitative portion. So the next steps for this investigative team, it would be to, again, really dig into the qualitative results. It was a really fascinating journey talking with those 50 people who were very representative from all over the country, large range in ages and experience with ChatGPT. One thing I thought was really interesting is one of the questions we would ask in the qualitative portion was, when did you first hear about artificial intelligence? Now, artificial intelligence has been around for decades, but so many people really equate artificial intelligence with ChatGPT. And so we'll have the opportunity to dig more into that and implications as we move forward in terms of scholarly research, but also implications for how to teach literacy around artificial intelligence. So we're going to dig into the qualitative portion. We're going to really dig more into the interpersonal stage models and really provide a greater sort of comprehensive overview there. We are well underway planning and writing research papers and publications. We have a target list of scholarly conferences that we are interested in seeing if we can submit for a talk. And we've also been looking into specific practice-related conferences, everything ranging from, South by Southwest to Serious Play Conference. I mean, the sky's the limit because I think there are so many real-world implications for the work we're doing together. And then certainly, I think we have on our horizon to do some concerted outreach to media.
And we purposely left lots of time for questions. We thought there would be plenty. So thank you so much, we are happy to answer.
Did you give them instructions
No.
They just were on their own?
No, so that, great question. We just said, at time one, we asked if they had used it at all, and then we did ask them to just keep track of their usage. And so we had, I think everyone did eventually use it. And that, we went through Prolific, so, you know, a platform where people are signing up to be in studies. That does tend to be a platform where people are a little more tech savvy or a little more willing to try the tech if they think that's going to come up. So by the end, everyone had used it, but I do like that we have people at the baseline who had not. And so no, we purposely said, you can join if you have, basically as long as you've heard of it.
So I have two questions, but I think you just answered.
Okay.
So the sample source is from
Prolific, yep,
Okay.
yep.
Can you go back and just slide the longitudinal results with the error bars? Yeah, so
Yes.
this one. So you said that the greatest difference between time 2 and time 3, but that it doesn't look like it's
It is.
because the error bars move around.
Yes. It is statistically significantly different at 0.001. I know.
Thank you. Okay.
So I'm sure you kept track of usage among people because I'm sure they vary greatly in terms of usage.
Yes.
So how did you measure usage and how did you then hold it constant for these relationships? Because otherwise, usage is going to be affecting about every variable.
It is, and so we asked them just on a scale of 1 to 5, how often are you using it? And then I controlled for that. What is interesting is it didn't do as much as I thought it would have done. And so it's something I still want to play with a little more, and we actually asked about their experience in a couple different ways. So the one I have just how much are you using it, but then like Margaret said, we also asked at the first survey and in their interviews, how much experience have you had to this point? Because I think where they're starting from will change, obviously, their increase in experience over time. And so that's something I've been thinking about going back and adding to the model is not just where they are at each time point, but where were they? So.
I know you have a lot to unpack with the rest of the research, but I'm just wondering what the next one is.
We have so many. I feel like so many. I mean, just getting into the qualitative and seeing, I think one of our big things is still, are people getting to know it, and at what point are they assigning personality factors to it? Because that was something I feel like that came up a lot. Even if we had qualitative open-ended questions, and I feel like people would assign like gender to theirs, and it's obviously different.
In terms of the qualitative, one gentleman named his ChatGPT, named it after his father who had passed away, and also out of the 50 respondents, some of the respondents were students, and I was not surprised, but I just wanted to state, so many students purposely try to avoid using chatbots or ChatGPT, for example. They feel like it makes them lazy, and so I think that sometimes flies in the face of certain generalizations that people might make around who's using ChatGPT. Also, with the qualitative, this is all anecdotal until we sort of crunch the data. But there were people who basically had never used ChatGPT before the qualitative interview, and they seem to be more I don't want to generalize, but they seem to be more mistrustful of it, and again purposely did not use it. A lot of people commented on how they felt like they were being manipulated to stay involved and still interact because of the design of the system, right? It's designed to keep you engaged. Would you like me to tell you more? So it's just really interesting to see all of that come through in the research.
I also just think the level of, I think there's something to people feeling like there's an uncanny thing happening here, and I think that ties into it where as much as they want to get to know it, there are so many reminders that it's a machine. And like Margaret said, where it's trying to hook you and keep you in, like, that's not something that humans would do, or not maybe in the way that they would do it. And so like I think with this, the first 2 time points, there's a novelty effect that pretty quickly drops off. And so I think that's something that's interesting to continue digging into as well.
Okay, following on from what Margaret said, I'm just curious. You said that you had 196 respondents, and I believe 47% were men, 51% women. And so I'm just curious, that demographic, was there a reason why there was more women who responded, or did you find that out of those reasons why more women responded? And also within your age group, which I think was from 21 to 82 years old, was there a specific age group which was larger, which was the largest out of all of the age groups?
Our data were pretty well spread out, so the ages, there wasn't very well represented. That's why the median age was 50, and average was 50. So I mean, really right in the middle there, which was honestly surprising because I expected it to skew younger. But with that, then age didn't relate to anything, at least not off the top of my head. Like I put it in the initial stats models and it just didn't do anything, which I think is fascinating. We could have like a whole talk just on why that might be. For the gender identity, I just split really nicely. We did try and put some controls so that we would have relatively equal representation, but like I said, we did leave it open too so that it wasn't just men or women, so people with other gender identities could participate, but we only ended up with 2, I think. And that also, so far, gender hasn't, there haven't been gender differences. Now what I will say, we also measured things like enjoyment, usefulness, and relational stages, and I could see both age and gender playing a role there. We haven't looked at that. Another thing I will say, at time 1, we measured people's attachment style because I thought that might relate to becoming closer to ChatGPT or maybe relying on it instead of another person. And both avoidant and anxious attachment also didn't relate to anything, which I'm shocked. Thank you. Yeah, I was really surprised by that. I thought at least anxious attachment might do something, and no gender differences or age differences there either. So a fascinating group of people that we ended up with.
That's so interesting. Did you find, like, when you were collecting your data, there was a lot of stuff going on? ChatGPT was still evolving. Do you think that had an impact? And then also the press coverage, you have a lot of issues with it. It's definitely
So I know we're not focusing on the qualitative, but so it was interesting because when we started this research, ChatGPT 4.0 was the model, and then they upgraded it up to 5.0. And for those of you who've used and are familiar with the models, we know the 5.0, it's slower, it's less sycophantic, right? And I felt like there was a noticeable difference in how people were interacting with ChatGPT with the 5.0 model. The 4.0 model, in fact, one of the respondents said that they preferred the older model and they will still revert back to using the older model because it knew them, versus the 5.0 model, which is it just feels a little colder, and that's by design. It's all design. Right?
What's interesting too is I think we were done with the quantitative analysis before 5.0 came out, so we'll have some interesting differences in the different data that we collected. But when Margaret was like, oh, look at what these people are saying about 5.0. I mean, they're definitely aware of it, and they're definitely paying attention.
I believe you have to pay for it, right? Change the price, so good.
I think so. Yeah, I have multiple ChatGPT accounts.
What do you see as social relationships pattern? About the social relationships with AI.
What a great question. So the question was if there's anything, perhaps parasocial relationship happening, or people with parasocial relationships with AI might be more inclined to have a social relationship. Did I get that?
Yeah, I mean, also, like, there was that long slide that I had this month specific to AI. They had, like, stronger parasocial relationships related to care, from the literature that I read, like, most of the times there is this correlation. So I was wondering if that, like,
It could. I think it could. I think it's an awesome question. And something because I've thought about this. Any of my 722 students are here. We talked about this a little bit because one thing that's interesting with parasocial, right, is those people who have those, it's a one-sided relationship. So you don't really hear from the celebrity. You might follow them on all the different platforms, and maybe they like a comment, but you're not really hearing from them. I think ChatGPT is really interesting, or like a replica or whatever, because it does get to respond to you. And to your point, I could see someone with a parasocial relationship with a celebrity, maybe then taking that relationship to something like replica and making an AI that acts like that celebrity. Because then it's going from interacting with the AI to it's kind of wish fulfillment or fantasy in a way. So yeah, I mean, I think those could absolutely be related, and maybe that's the next study.
Yeah, and if I could just quickly add, we've seen that happen with very public stories with character AI, for example. We've seen that happen, and then I've been playing around with the latest Sora 2, which is another OpenAI product, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And there, it's possible to take a cameo of oneself, remix it with other celebrities like Jake Paul, for example. I could go, I could go windsurfing with Jake Paul in a 15-second video clip that looks incredibly realistic. So it has huge implications for where we're heading as a culture and a society.
All the way back.
Oh yeah, I just kind of wanted to piggyback off of what she was saying, but I don't know if you've taken a look at the kind of communities r/my boyfriend is AI, but people are kind of they're training ChatGPT to become the perfect partner for them.
Oh yes, I certainly have, and that's one thing I think that will come out more in our qualitative, for sure, is looking at those people who, it's not just I'm interacting with it, but I've made a custom experience. And I think that's something that people are still really learning how to do. When we were collecting, especially the early surveys, I don't think our participants were as inclined to do that. I don't think a lot of them knew they could do that. And I think that goes back to the question about just press coverage, right? Because that coincides with how people are then learning about what they can make their ChatGPT do. I have a lot of thoughts about that, which we could always get into. But it's really interesting to watch. It's this interesting intersection of taking all you've learned from personalizing your social media feeds, and now you're getting it responding back to you.
I guess this is kind of going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning about having a physical computer and then use that practically through that. This is completely theoretical, just a curiosity, I guess. But if we did give ChatGPT one physical look, through that computer, or would you put it in another Sophia robot, something like that? We see the numbers that you had skyrocket. Did that happen?
That's why the robotics industry is so focused on creating humanoid robots. You see companies like Unitree, or just down the street, Boston Dynamics, and having a robot have a humanoid form, it's not always necessary, right? But they're really bought into that design. Or you see even Disney Imagineering piloting robots for their theme parks. So. There's something to be said. I know that, again, the company Unitree, which is based in China, is marketing a robot companion that is certainly very humanoid. So, and just anecdotally, the first job I had in the tech industry, in the video games industry, was working on virtual pets. So, we were these just very crude, 2.5D characters. And the amount of belief that children and adults, full adults, put into those pets, saying that pet knows me, when it was just scripted behavioral design. So I think our brains are just primed to want to relate to people and things in that way. And that's why we also tend to anthropomorphize generative AI, ChatGPT, a lot, I think to our detriment.
I think on the flip of that, too, a lot of the research to this point on AI has focused on the fact that things like ChatGPT, Replica are text-based, and there are arguments that we've learned to communicate so well through instant messenger, through text message, that we don't need the robot to have to mimic that human interaction anymore. And that's been really interesting to look at, and that's my original line of research looks at how people meet online dating partners without ever being in person. And so it's a very similar idea and that's where you go back to the kind of perfect boyfriend that so many people are trying to build, where you don't need that physical component because we've learned the tech enough, we know how to achieve our goals through just text-based messaging, which is fascinating. So I think the robot question is really, really interesting. And it also, you know, does a robot fit into your everyday the way that a text message does?
So I was actually really interested in character AI before, and I was in the project of character AI. And I want to mention that we use AI in a really different way from normal people use. We use the API link and on a certain kind of platform so that make the AI perform like smarter. And also I want to mention that ChatGPT actually performs really worse than other AI like Gemini in character planning. And we do not use it just as a logger. We use it to create a world like video games, RPG games. And then you have your own word information there, and you can also monitor like mobile phones, and also you can like computers. Is the page of the computer is monitored, so that's kind of interesting. Just download the information.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right and that's part of why ChatGPT was honestly great for us to study is because you're right, it's in many ways not as refined, and I think that's part of what's so exciting about our samples. We were able to get people who were just starting out rather than that kind of other end of the spectrum where they're so good at it or they really understand it. So maybe that's also another study because we definitely, I would say our both qualitative and quantitative samples skew more towards that novice where they're still trying to figure it out and see, like they could not imagine like that whole world yet.
That certainly is where we're heading. I mean, you know, I was just talking with a colleague of mine, Alvin Wang Graylin, who used to work at HTC China, and now he's teaching, and I'm going to try to bring him here as a speaker. And they are fully convinced we're just a few years away from these spontaneously created worlds, these spontaneously created playable NPCs, non-player characters that are the evolution of the character AI platform.
Is there overlap between your quantitative sample and qualitative?
No, that was the beauty of the grant. We completely focused our quantitative recruitment on prolific, but then we did all the qualitative just through our personal networks. And I did some throughout campus.
There were certainly some from campus, but honestly, I would say a majority of the respondents were from all over the world. A lot from like Oregon, from Florida, just all over the United States. It was really and a pretty large range of ages. I think our average age was closer to 30, so a little younger for the qualitative. But it was really interesting to. You know, to speak with, for example, the mother who was going through a divorce, who was relying on ChatGPT for legal help and felt like she had something in her corner to help her navigate this very complex landscape.
But so we ended up ultimately with about 250 unique participants through all our technicals. Any other questions?
Are you going to look at any of the data looking at differences in gender or risk?
So the data that we presented today, there shockingly were no gender differences, but that's what we have so much more. Exactly, but I feel like for some of the variables we didn't look at yet or haven't presented today, at least there might be some. Like I said, one of the things we did was try and measure where people perceive the stage of their relationship to be. So, do you feel like this is the start of a relationship? Do you feel like you've gotten to know each other? Not quite, are you committed, but are you on the verge? And we also assessed for, are you thinking about breaking up? I mean, we really applied like the interpersonal to this. And so that I'm interested to see if gender differences don't emerge there potentially. And it's another one where we have all of those over time. So we'll also be able to do like we did today and say, okay, just on the whole, are these changing? And then we can add things like gender and also experience, again, for sure.
So we've all heard about how gender
holistic literature review. So she had 3 different Gen AI platforms to do the literature review, and then she had humans put together a literature review as well, and then they compared them, and they found that 70% of the Gen AI references were hallucinations. So, did you ask about any of that to come out in your qualitative? Is it quantitative question?
Yeah, it definitely did come out, and the people I spoke with, for the most part, were very wary with the results. In fact, I would have people, ask something that they were sort of subject matter experts on, and they would go through line by line and debunk it. And for any of us who are using ChatGPT as a search engine, I mean, it's very similar to Google. Like, if you do a Google search, a lot of times the results you're getting are not accurate as well. And obviously, one should use libraries to do appropriate research and what have you. So there was a lot of the check but verify. Also, just a little tip, if you copy any links out of ChatGPT, they will add an attribution tag to that URL, so just clean that up. And always check your sources. But yeah, there was a lot of criticism about how untrustworthy the results were for various things, like, I want to take my kids to a pizza place in South Beach. Where should I go? Oh, this pizza place, I would never go there. It's really bad. So there were factual inaccuracies, but also sort of subjective inaccuracies that people were very apt to point out.
I guess we should also make clear, because I don't know that we did, we have the qualitative interviews, but we did also ask them to interact with ChatGPT, so we have their chat transcripts as well. Yeah, we haven't even gotten to look at those yet. I mean, so we're data rich right now, and so that's one thing that's really very exciting is we'll be able to look not just at what people were telling us, but we'll be able to look at the conversations that they had. So just like research.
Yeah.
Yes, we will need research assistants. Spring 26.
Outside of this setting, what do you both use ChatGPT professionally?
Nothing.
I use it a fair amount, and I also integrate it into the classes. Well, my interactive media class in particular, I have very structured assignments. So, for example, again, this is not a production course. So I have one assignment where students can build a prototype using ChatGPT. So just the other day, one of my MSTV students showed me a game prototype for a platform hopper type game that he created. And I also encourage students to use generative AI for what's been called vibe coding. And I also use generative AI quite a bit for vibe coding. I just vibe code it in my portfolio. And I also show them that it's possible to use it for very quick, not always the best, but data visualization. Again, just to show that there are other ways to interact with data without having to necessarily know how to program in Python. You can use it. You can also use ChatGPT or Claude to teach yourself coding skills as well, which I also emphasize as being important.
But I think that's why we're a good team, because I'm not like a total hater. But I think I have a lot more skepticism, and Margaret doesn't. And I think that made for a really good both set of surveys and the interview guide, because I don't feel like there was a hard bias in either direction, which has been really healthy through analyzing as well.
Yeah, I agree, it's very nuanced. And one quick bit of sort of anecdotal data. I mentioned one of the questions we asked is, when did you first learn about AI? People often equate AI with ChatGPT, but the second most common response is the way people learned about artificial intelligence was through science fiction. So through movies like Her and other programs. And so I think that's a very interesting area to research. That whole design fiction area, I think, has a lot of potential.
I have a question about policy. So I know many people will talk to others. It's like you can make trash, but it will also use AI to revise the message, improve the message. So I remember it's kind of like human AI cooperation. So I'm curious, you were how to do research with
you like inside the box section to provide information. It's not like directly asking that question, but using it as a tool to help with questions.
100%. I saw that a ton, quite a bit, and that's a great question. People would use it to, the woman who I interviewed who's a mother who was going through a difficult divorce would use it to not only for legal advice, but to help her tone down her emails that she was writing to her ex-husband. A lot of respondents were using it to help them with the tone and to kind of help them not do the thinking for them, but to use it in an ideally additive way and to help them sort of frame their thinking. I saw that a lot with emails, writing emails and cover letters, stuff like that.
Just a question about guided development. I just wondering if there are any other control variable except the ethnographic thing that you could use to discuss survey.
So mostly just, again, their experience with it. I would say that's been the big thing. Since age didn't do anything in the initial correlations we haven't controlled for, but as we go back and look at the other variables, that's one that is definitely up for discussion, especially the findings with age are very mixed, in part because the data are still relatively new, right? Because, like you said, people are still just getting to understand how to use it. So those are the main ones we've played with. I was going to control for attachment style, but it related to absolutely nothing. So, but I thought that would be an interesting psychological control. And so far, it's a pretty lean model that we have, which isn't a bad thing, but still to be determined as we look at some of our other variables for sure.
And for the qualitative, we collected age, gender, geographic location, sexual identity, so we yeah.
Questions like people who are less organized, have they ever asked the AI to redact like document, or have they ever made some regulations for like just reading?
Not in our survey data. And I think huge next question, right, is what makes people perceive it as human. And that's why I think the affordances aspect is interesting, because there's a clear relationship between this perception of humanness and knowing how to use the technology, but I think we can definitely take it a step further and say, well, what are your interactions like? And that's probably what we'll get from more of the qualitative for sure. But I think especially for the people who are just thinking of it as an assistant, as something to help them with their tone, I'm not surprised that they're still seeing it as a tool rather than a person.
I'm sure you've seen the new, the friend necklace, the AI, and kind of how it's received a lot of negative public backlash. I'm wondering if that has any, future implications for, our attitudes towards, ChatGPT and, other AIs, perceiving them as human.
So for those of you who haven't seen, one of the trends happening in Silicon Valley around fundraising are these wearable devices, right? So there's the friend, the cynically named friend device that basically is meant to capture all of your memories. There have been other things, Microsoft Recall, if you have a Windows machine, Recall takes a snapshot of your desktop unless you disable it. I think that there's something to be said for memory and the humanness of memory versus memory that is driven by these AI platforms and in some ways commodified and commoditized. I don't know if it's been necessarily related to ChatGPT, but overall I feel like as a society, we have to really think about the level to which these tools are used as for surveillance, and also, our memories are human, and what does it mean when we externalize that with these devices, and who owns them, where are they stored, all that kind of stuff. So I haven't heard it related as much to OpenAI. But I've definitely seen that trend of capture every memory, store it in the cloud, only $9.99 a month. You know.
I think we're out of time, so let's give a nice hand to